binded to the view, and any view changes are updated to the model, and it is a continuous process. It is a continuous process. You don't need to explicitly configure anything. Implicitly it supports. That means it supports reading and writing into the model, reading from the model and writing into the model. This is what actually the concept of two-way binding. Two-way binding. In two-way binding, model is the single source of truth. That means suppose previously it was A, and that A is presented into the view. There they change it to AB. That means it contains information AB. That means what is previous and what is new both are present in the model. In the model. So that is what actually the concept called single source of truth. The approach is called single source of truth. So model is known as a single source of truth as it contains continuous updates, right? And it is continuously connected with the view. This is two-way binding technique. I will show you practically both how they work, one-way binding and a two-way binding, how these options will work. So how we can handle. And very important is generally one-way binding means what happens is those diagrams also I will post you, because we have a perfect architectural diagrams for one-way and two-way binding. I will post you them, right? So I will post those one-way and two-way binding related diagrams. You can go through that, right? So here, what is one-way binding? So one-way binding is read-only technique, right? So it is read-only technique. It is read-only technique. It is read-only technique. So that means model provides data, so which is updated to view. So it is one time rendering. So there is no continuous updates. There is no continuous updates. That means changes in the view are not updated to model. That is what actually one-way binding. And important is Angular here. Point is Angular handles one-way binding by using a interpolation, by using B at property binding and C attribute binding. Angular handles one-way binding by using interpolation, property binding, and attribute binding. So what is interpolation, property binding, and attribute binding? Let's see that point here. Actually, how to interact with the data, get the data, and use the data in a JSON form, bringing the data, that requires so many concepts to learn first. That's the reason, don't worry, because many people ask, sir, show with the JSON data. We will learn about that, but this is not the right time to directly jump into that, right? In order to get the data from a JSON, you need HTTP clients. You are very at the basic level of understanding Angular. You cannot talk about HTTP clients at this level. That's the reason. So later we will learn about how to get JSON data and use the data. Initially, component. Yesterday already we created a login component, right? So we have a login component, and that login component is working fine here. So let's go into the design of this login component TS file. Already we learned how to add it. Login component.ts, and login component.html. So temporarily in the HTML, I will clean up everything. I will just keep a div and class as some container. Okay, fine. And there is nothing in the UI. So currently I cleaned up the UI. That means there is no UI. It will refresh because I recompiled it. And this time you can see it is empty. So nothing is there in the view. So it is empty. Nothing is there in the view. Okay. Now let's go to here the TypeScript here. And here I will create a simple property. So public username, and username is equal to, it is having some John, the value is username. Now I want to display this username in a text box. That means I need to bind it to the text box. So here, so name, and I will just keep here simply a label. So username, okay. And below this we have a div. And here I said input type is equal to text. Okay, to this I need to bind that username. So bind that username. Now, how you will bind that username and configure that username here? Now here, so many points are there. Technically, so here we need to understand how to get it and display. First, I want to get it and display some in another location. I will keep another div. Here I will say hello. And here I need to bring that username. Then we use a binding expression. That is, this is the binding expression. Through this binding expression, we are accessing username. We are accessing username. Initially, it is getting that username and displaying hello John. That's good. So that means through a data binding expression, we are accessing and we are displaying. Here I haven't binded to any element, just I am displaying. Okay. Now important, I need to show this inside the text box. Inside the text box. That means I need to bind to the text box. How you will bind to the text box? Actually, if I have to bind to the text box can show anything inside it by using value. Now tell me this value of text box. So what should I call it now? Now what should I call it? That means in input type is equal to text. Now value, what should I call it? Is it a property? Is it a property or attribute? Can you tell me? What should I call value as? A property or attribute? What should I call it? A property or attribute? Anyone else? So one says property. Yeah. First important is if you know HTML, right? Generally, in HTML, whatever you write in a tag is an attribute. Whatever you write in a tag is attribute. Whatever you write in a tag is attribute. So you should not call it as property. Tags of HTML will not have properties. They will have attributes. They will have attributes. And important is when you are dynamically handling the text box. Dynamically handling the text box means, for example, so this text box is having an ID as txt name. So txt name, that is ID. now I am accessing it, document dot get